Good morning, everyone, and welcome. I'm pleased that you can join us today, and I just want to thank everybody for being here. I'm sorry that we're not able to be at McHenry Museum like we have been in the past, but hopefully next year we can do that also. My name is Bill Jackson, and I'm the chair of the Stanislaus Community Foundation Board of Directors. It's an honor and a privilege to lead this organization with such great roots in this community. And on behalf of all of us here today, I would like to thank the board and the staff for all of their hard work that they have done collectively over this past year. Today, our CEO, Mary Ann Cannon, and other partners will share how Stanislaus Community Foundation has stepped up to meet some of the challenges that we've been faced with in this last year. But first, I'd like to introduce Jennifer Ellison of Bingham, Osborne, and Scarborough. Jennifer is our investment manager and will be sharing information about our portfolio performance and providing an overview of market conditions. Thank you, Jennifer.
Thanks, Bill. And it's always such a pleasure to be here and to talk with you all at this event. Look forward to hopefully being able to see you all in person next year at the museum. I have a few slides I'm going to share to help review kind of what's gone on in the markets and the economy in this sort of pandemic recovery period we've been in, and how that has impacted the portfolio of the Community Foundation. My slides, hopefully, there we go. So I'll start out by saying it's been a bit of a confusing year as we look backwards. So I had a lot of questions last summer from folks saying, how is it that the market has recovered and we're still in the midst of economic fallout from the pandemic, the economy shut down, unemployment at record levels? And the answer was the market had not recovered. What had recovered were a small handful of the largest companies, mostly new economy kinds of companies. The biggest in the world are, the biggest five in the world are Apple, Amazon, Google, Facebook, and Microsoft. And those five companies in aggregate, in many ways, benefited from the pandemic. Their stocks did very well through the pandemic and the recovery from that. And if you look at this chart on the left-hand side, you see that those five stocks alone represent about a quarter of the weight of the S&P 500. An index that is often referred to as the market, but really it's just reflective of a component of the market. And on the right-hand side of this chart, you'll see that those five stocks in aggregate over the last 12 months are up over 60%. They just did phenomenally well in the early part of the recovery. And that drove the S&P returns because they make up such a heavy weighting in it, and they really dwarf hundreds of other companies. And if you remove those five companies from the results of the index, the return is almost half as much as it was with those five companies. So the index itself was really heavily driven by a small handful of companies until November. And the next slide takes a peek at returns of several different indices from November through the end of the first quarter of this year. And what's notable about this time period, of course, is November is when the first vaccine, the Pfizer vaccine, was announced. And that was the impetus for really the broad stock market recovery and the beginning of the economic recovery. And here what we're looking at is the blue and the gold indices are the small cap indices. Small cap stocks had been deeply negative until November, and then really had this massive rally in the months that followed the announcement of the vaccine. The dark red is the Russell 1000 Value Index. That's an index of large company value stocks, cheaper companies. They also had been lagging by a lot in the pre-vaccine era, and started to really make their recovery as well. And then, of course, the S&P continued to do well with a return of over 20% from November through the end of March, but really, dwarfed by particularly small company stocks. So I would argue that now we really have seen the market recovery. It was vaccine driven for the most part, because that's what gave the economy and investors a sense that the economy could open, we could start to revert to more normal activities and start to get people back to work and spend money the way we used to spend it and keep the economy going. So we are definitely in recovery mode at this point. And it's looking very good. We're in the midst of earnings season right now for first quarter earnings and just at the cusp of it. But so far, those numbers are looking very, very good, much better than even expected. So that's positive news. Next slide takes a peek at the allocation of the portfolio for the Community Foundation. And it is, as I've mentioned in previous years, it's broadly diversified, tilted towards stocks, about 60% in stocks and 40% in bonds. Bonds did really well last year because interest rates dropped basically to zero, and that pushed bond prices up. So they were not only a ballast in the period of volatility, but also provided some nice returns last year. And the stock side of the portfolio is broadly diversified across technology and new economy stocks, along with real estate, a good exposure to the S&P 500, but also to the value stocks and small company stocks and foreign stocks, both developed and emerging markets. And so you really got the exposure of both sides of the recovery from this pandemic. You had the exposure to the technology in the S&P in the early part of the recovery and the exposure to everything else in the latter part of the recovery. And so if you go to the next slide, you'll see how this is translated. And this looks back since we've been managing this portfolio beginning in 2016. This is such a great story, really, both about what the markets and the portfolio have done, but also about what the fantastic staff has done at the Community Foundation with respect to raising assets. Back in 2016, when we began working together, the portfolio had about 16 million. And that the lighter blue line goes up or down when money's added to or subtracted from the portfolio. So there's been some fundraising that's gone on, obviously, which has really helped, but then also grants made out to the community, which is what we want. And long term, we really want to see the light blue line continue, hopefully it goes up and down with grants for sure. And the darker blue, which is the actual portfolio value, we want to continue increasing or at least remaining steady as grants go out, because the market is essentially fueling the ability to give. And that's really what we see here, that now the portfolio is worth over 33 million. And that delta between 33 million and the lighter blue line, which as of today, about 22 million, that $10 million difference is really what the market has provided to the portfolio in the last 5 years. So it's a great story. Next slide looks just at a brief overview of returns. This has been a very strong year so far. The portfolio is up almost 13% just in the first 3.5 months of this year. That is, of course, we're in recovery mode. So it's not unexpected to have a pretty significant rise in markets when we are recovering from economic calamity, really. But this next slide is I think, even more telling, which looks at the period from the beginning of the pandemic to now. And I ran it from February 1st, I believe. If you can change slides, you'll see from February 1st through April 15th of February 1st of last year through, I'm sorry, I take it back. I thought I ran it from February of last year. I ran it for the entire period. That return is 9.4% annualized return going back to 2016. I misspoke about the time period, which is also fantastic. So important to note that over this period, inflation has remained relatively low. And so when we're looking at a portfolio like this, where we want it to go on forever, and we want it to be able to fuel the giving that occurs every year, you really want to have a real return above inflation that meets or is greater than the amount you are distributing every year. And if we subtract inflation from this annualized number, you end up with a real return over this period of time of about 8%, close to 8%, which is higher than normal. Now, I will say 5 years is a very short time period to sort of measure. And it's been a good time period, obviously, although it's included the pandemic. And so even with that, you're trailing well ahead of what we would even expect longer term from a broadly diversified portfolio net of inflation. So it has been a good period. I did look before this call at how the portfolio has done relative to various indices from the beginning of the pandemic, which I started to talk about, until now. And those results are even better than this 9.4%. So the portfolio's moved on obviously to new highs, but it also has participated really well in the recovery. If we look back over the last 12 months, the stocks in the portfolio are trending ahead of the broad indices, both on the US and even more so on the foreign side. And fixed income, because we've maintained a relatively safe fixed income allocation with a relatively short duration, those bonds have also done quite well in this recovery, and we were able to avoid the parts of the bond market that were really disrupted in the midst of the market decline of the pandemic. So I'll stop there. I can take a couple of questions. I believe we've got a few minutes that I can take a couple of questions. If there are any, you're welcome to put them in the chat. I don't see any yet. So if I'm just going to take a quick peek before. Yeah, I don't see any yet. So if there aren't any, we can move on. And I'm happy to answer them later if there's time, or you can email them to Marianne and I'm happy to respond.
Thanks, Jennifer. Yeah, and by all means, for those of you that are on the call, if you have questions for Jennifer at any point in the presentation, please do drop those in the chat and we'll definitely answer them at the tail end. So thank you, Jennifer, for joining us. And I know you'll stay on, but you'll be off the video for a while. So welcome, everyone. It's so nice to, you know, I can't see you, but I know I'm talking to a lot of people. I've been watching who's on the call. My name is Marianne Cannon. I'm the president and CEO of Stanislaus Community Foundation. And I will tell you that when we started the year last year in 2020, we had a tagline that we said to the board was going to be our tagline moving forward, not just into 2020, but into the decade. And that was going to be that foresight is 2020. And we thought that was a clever play on words, that, you know, it really does take a lot of foresight to move into the challenges that this decade was going to bring us when we think about, you know, alleviating poverty and breaking the generational cycle of poverty in a community like Stanislaus, which is very much the focus of our leadership work. And I know the focus of many of you as our donors and local nonprofit leaders. So that tagline was put aside very quickly when March unfolded. I think I was muted. But yeah, so really the tagline going into 2020 was that foresight is 2020. And we quickly abandoned that really, in my mind, fun tagline for our work and began to shift as the pandemic unfolded in March 2020. We canceled the Cradle to Career Partnership Summit that we had scheduled for March 13th. And if you go to the next slide, we quickly pivoted to a very responsive and nimble place as a community foundation, which was to understand what was happening with local nonprofits. And we did a quick survey on that date, on March 13th, as the governor was beginning to signal that he was going to shut down parts of the state and issue a shelter-in-place directive. And we began to understand how huge these disruptions were going to be. And even then, we only could kind of barely conceive what was about to happen, as I'm sure was the experience for many of you. And the local nonprofits really responded and said, you know, their events were being canceled. Any revenue that they collect from being on site at schools was quickly dissipating as schools were shutting down, and the demand was increasing. One of our food banks reported a 400% increase in demand for food. And you began to see, you know, long lines at schools for their lunch programs. And it was just I don't even know if we still have the words for what we've seen and experienced in 2020, but it was a clarifying year for us at the Community Foundation. And so we quickly pivoted to really respond to our nonprofits and what they were needing with the help of all of you that are donors that are on this call. We hosted a series of webinars really focused on supporting nonprofits and their needs. And we partnered with the United Way and others to fund 14 local nonprofits. You'll be hearing from one of them in a moment, to receive some financial counseling about how to change up their business model. So one of the things I think we're proudest of is how we partnered with nonprofits and really tried to respond to real-time needs as they were emerging. The second thing we did, if you go to the next slide, is partner with many of you as our donors. We've never received more calls than we did in 2020 from all of you, really trying to make sense of what was happening. And so I will tell you, even though we started 2020 thinking of this tagline that foresight is 2020, we moved from the idea of sight to sense making. And I think we were trying to make sense of what was happening and trying to provide some insight to our donors and to our nonprofits. So as the year progressed, we surveyed the nonprofits again as we began to see that this was obviously a long-term shift. And we published the State of the Stanislaus County Nonprofit Sector. And a lot of our donors took that and really followed through with the recommendations we were making on how to fund our nonprofits and really provide them the support that's needed. We also formed a funder circle with other funders to really coordinate response efforts and really leverage our investments, because we are a philanthropically undersourced community, as you can imagine, especially compared to the coastal regions of California. And we conducted different educational webinars, not just for our donors, but also for our nonprofits as the year progressed. So if you go to the next slide, I think what I'm also very proud of is the impact we had. We tripled our giving in the last year, thanks to all of you and thanks to some of the funds we set up in place. As you can see, those funds really went to every corner of our community. And we made significant investments in almost every nonprofit in our community did receive some sort of grant at some point through the Community Foundation. We also now have more than 170 charitable funds under the umbrella of the Community Foundation, and we are stewarding and supporting the needs of different donors through those fund vehicles. If you go to the next slide, I think the biggest realization for us at the Community Foundation was the role philanthropy can play in crisis. What we really began to understand is, as many of you probably witnessed in your own professional, personal lives, is that crisis does force opportunity, and it forces creativity, and it can force meaningful change. And so we really began to understand that our role could be to still, in crisis, innovate and try new things and prototype new things and maybe come up with new solutions that could then be scaled by other partners. And that's exactly what happened. I'll give you the first example. We took the Resilient Stanislaus Fund that was really initiated by a group of local private donors. There was a call to action from Evan Porges and Brad Artis, two local business leaders, to all of their peers and colleagues to help raise money for grants to small businesses and nonprofits. And they did raise, more than $300,000 in the Resilient Stanislaus Fund. And I will tell you, we coordinated with the United Way so that the United Way was really doing immediate recovery efforts. And we were supporting some of the small business grants and other things for nonprofits. So we took the Resilient Stanislaus Fund and really focused not on short-term recovery, but really shoring up, especially nonprofits that are youth serving and performing arts and culture organizations. Because not only did their revenue disappear, they also weren't sort of the focus for many of our donors who really focused on shelter, basic needs, and other services. So we really focused our funding, because it was so flexible, on nonprofits that are serving youth and arts and culture organizations. And with that, because we tried something really new, the Stanislaus County Board of Supervisors then scaled our program and worked with us to provide more than $2 million in CARES Act funding to those same nonprofits. So we administered our grants. We recognized there was a huge need among those two types of nonprofit organizations, and they do lend to the vibrancy of our community, and we want them to be here when we begin to reopen. And the County Board of Supervisors, with their vision, really understood that as well. And so we were able to partner with them and really scale what for us was an initial investment, an initial program, and then was scaled by government, which is a great way for philanthropy and the public sector to work together. especially again in crisis. The second example of philanthropy as a catalyst is the Rad Card Program. So we approached the Downtown Modesto Partnership, and they've done just a phenomenal job with this idea of having a gift card where the money is doubled. And the way the money is doubled, so let's say you buy a Rad Card, it's all online on your phone, and you put $100 of your own money, it's doubled by private donors. And those two donors initially came from the Community Foundation. It was Dave and Jeannie Olson and Evan and Norm Porges. They provided $125,000 in seed funding to match dollar for dollar what consumers were placing on these cards. And it basically was a win-win. It doubled the money for local consumers, which was important as people were struggling financially. And it provided dollars to local downtown Modesto restaurants and retailers. You're going to hear from someone in a moment about that. And the beauty of this, again, was that we were a catalyst for more investment on the part of the Stanislaus County Board of Supervisors. They then added an additional $2 million in the Rad Card Program through the Downtown Partnership. And recently, the City of Modesto has provided additional $650,000. So another example of how the work of the Community Foundation, the work of donors like you, can really begin something that then can be leveraged to help more and more people. So with that said, I really want to introduce three people that sort of exemplify and embody the work that the Community Foundation has supported in the last year, and each of them in their own unique way has a story to tell. So I'm going to bring on Susie Fagundes, who's the owner of Intrinsic Elements. It just celebrated, I think it's 10th or 11th year in downtown Modesto. And I also am bringing on Tamara Lusinski from Modesto Family Promise. She's the executive director. It's a local shelter organization. And Chris Courtney, who's the president and CEO of Oak Valley Community Bank. So if all three of you can join me on the call, and I think we'll start with Susie first. If you could each turn your videos on. I'll start with Susie first. Susie, why don't you tell us a little bit about your store and how COVID impacted you, and then how the Rad Card was able to help?
Yes, I will. Thank you. So Michelle Powers and I are co-owners of Intrinsic Elements. It's a gift boutique on J Street here in downtown Modesto. And we opened our store 2010. And yes, you were correct. We just marked our 11th anniversary. So the economy was challenging in 2010, and it did take a while for us to grow our business. And in 2019, we had just found our flow, as in we had finally seen black ink in our books. And then COVID-19 hit. Suddenly, our streets downtown were empty. In March 2020, we complied with county protocol and temporarily closed the store for 3 months. Fortunately, your group and the Downtown Modesto Partnership were already exploring the idea of the Rad Card. And when Josh Bridegroom first presented the idea, it sounded to me like a too good to be true proposal. And yet I wanted to support Josh's idea. I went to the very first meeting Domo held to explain to business owners how the Rad Card could help us. And I was still always looking for the catch, either for us or our customers. And to this day, I have never found a downside to the Rad Card. The meeting was so well run that every question I came with was answered, and we signed up to accept the card that very day. Registration was simple, and then I was amazed how quickly and easily our staff mastered its use. Since it began, we've had very few days, if any, without at least one Rad Card sale, and on most days, there were several. The system is set up so that I receive an email every time the Rad Card is used in our store. And that was the first thing that alerted me to recognize the huge financial impact that it was making. With the excitement of the Rad Card, our customers began making larger than usual purchases. And with the addition of new customers, we were able to retain our entire staff. So today, along with expressing our gratitude and acknowledging that your investment helped 45 businesses in downtown survive the pandemic and saved countless jobs, I'd like to point out what I think is the long-term effect. The Rad Card brought new customers to all of us who chose to accept it in our businesses. A great number of people have been inspired to come down to use the card. And over, we hear the same comments. I haven't been downtown in years, or even I've never had a reason to come downtown. And returning customers saying they had forgotten how cool it is down here. And for the comment for which I wish I had $1 for every time I heard it, is I had no idea there was a store like this in Modesto, and then this one, oh gosh, now I don't have to go to the Bay Area for these things. So personally, I think starting the economic support effort in the downtown was a brilliant economic plan. It's remarkable to think of all of you who invested time and treasure to rescue the downtown business community during COVID-19. And I'm confident that the vitality that came downtown through this philanthropy will last far beyond this current pandemic. If you ever wonder if the Rad Card has been a good investment, just call me. I can go on with personal anecdotal information that speaks to the ripple effect it had and will continue to have throughout our entire Stanislaus community. So I thank you for the opportunity to speak to your group today, and thank you for finding our downtown business community worthy of your support. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Susie. We'll turn it over to Tamara from Family Promise.
Good morning. Appreciate this opportunity to be here today and to thank you on behalf of Family Promise and the nonprofits in our community I know, and all of the neighbors that you've helped over this period. While COVID-19 affected all of us, it was particularly difficult on families experiencing homelessness. Not having a home is always traumatic, but especially for children, but never more so than when you can't go to work and school. Prior to March 2020, Family Promise addressed the needs of families experiencing homelessness through our interfaith congregation model. Volunteers provided shelter and meals in existing houses of worship at no cost to our guests or to our program. When news of the shutdown came, we had a baby in our program on oxygen and the majority of our volunteers in the high-risk category. To protect these vulnerable groups, we immediately moved our families to motels, which meant changing nearly all of our program procedures and documents and policies. And then we went to work to identify funding to manage an increase of $10,000 to $15,000 a month. The Stanislaus Community Foundation and Resilient Stanislaus were one of the earliest to contact us and ask us what we needed with the surveys that they sent, and provided an early response that helped us meet critical needs and keep our program open so that we could serve our community without interruption. The support met some of the following critical needs for us. Technology. Like many small nonprofits in our community, our access to technology has been limited, but the funds helped us improve access, support remote work, and improve communication with the clients that were coming to our program. Also, it helped supported strategic planning for us. In the midst of a pandemic may not seem like the best time to tackle strategic planning, but for us, it was the most necessary time as we shifted to a completely new model of service. And we worked with Mission Edge, as Marianne mentioned, to develop budget and reporting systems that have supported us from moving to 1 or 2 government grants a year to what will soon be 12 government grants a year. Big change for our program. It was critical to allow us to continue to leverage government funding, and provided some support for that in additional ways too. We always appreciate the support of our government partners, and their response during this time was great. But as is usually the case with government funding, it does take a little bit of time and is nearly always for the nonprofits on a reimbursement basis. So the agility and flexibility of other funding from the Stanislaus Community Foundation and others helped us to be able to meet real needs in real time and prepare to leverage that government funding as it became available. It also helped us to, as we prepared the budget with Mission Edge and get things a little bit more stable as far as what we were expecting, it helped us to be able to be in a position to look for creative solutions. As we started to realize that the impact of COVID was going to continue longer than any of us had hoped and expected, we shifted our focus to look for longer term, more cost-effective options. With the budget and funding in place, we've now secured 4 shelter apartments, which cost us less than half of what the motels were costing. And so that's what the difference has been for us. And Dana and Dion, one of the families that recently stayed at our program, they had a 2-month-old little baby and their time had expired with another shelter program. They were in their car. As we brought them into one of our shelter apartments, we found that both of their parents had previously been experiencing homelessness in our community. And so their struggling families didn't have the resources to help them during this critical time. So with a safe place to stay, we're very proud that both of them have now started working with a youth employment program and have already moved into a little studio apartment, which is their very first apartment on their own. And we are still helping with case management and all the things that can support them in their housing. So on their behalf and the many others that we've been able to help in our community, we say a heartfelt thank you for your generosity over the past year. And together you have helped us continue to address homelessness at this critical time. Thank you.
Thanks, Tamara. And now we'll turn it over to Chris, who was one of the very first and significant donors to the Resilient Stanislaus Fund. So Chris.
Thank you, Marion. Yeah, so, I got the call to speak today and tell the story of Oak Valley Community Bank and our involvement in the Resilience Fund. And it required me to go back in time about a year from now and to remind myself where we were and what was going on with the bank and with our customers. And obviously it was trying times for everybody and a lot of uncertainty. We really didn't know how things were going to land. We knew we had a pandemic, we had a shutdown. And so our story really starts with PPP and how that affected our customers and even non-customers. And then ultimately we realized that this is going to impact everybody in our community. So it was an all bank effort, almost day and night for a good 45 days to get as much funds as we could in PPP out to our customers, and then eventually to everybody in the community, knowing the impact of 2008 and how bad that was economically on Stanislaus County in the Central Valley. And so it really was a rebel cry for the entire staff of Oak Valley. And we're not a big bank, 195 employees, but I like to think we've got a pretty good heart. And so the folks here at the bank labored and did everything they could to put their best foot forward with PPP. But it became very obvious really quick that PPP was an awesome federal program, good shotgun approach, but there was some holes in it. There are blind spots. And the couple of blind spots we saw were nonprofit organizations who didn't always qualify. Some did, but in the early days of the pandemic, there was not clear qualification for all nonprofits. The other issue with the smallest of businesses, especially sole proprietors or Schedule C filers, were given reimbursement through PPP only on net income. And as you all know, that is not the same as revenue. And so there was a definite hole in the program and a blind spot that became to us very apparent. So when we received the email from Evan Porges and Brad Artist to chip in, it was really clear to us that this was the rifle and the bullet that we needed to hit the mark on some of the areas of the program through PPP that hadn't been hit. So that was our rationale for doing it. It hit a spot in our communities that PPP couldn't do. And so we jumped in, and it really wasn't, it was not a big discussion. It was an immediate, it wasn't, are we going to do it? The question is, how much are we going to do it, and how we continue to support our community throughout the pandemic, and even going forward, we're not out of this yet. So that was really the impetus, Marion, for why we chose to do what we did.
Well, thank you, Chris. It made a huge difference. I think obviously both financially, but also the spirit in which it was intended and the timing so early on in the pandemic, before we even got some of the other stimulus funds in the form of CARES Act funding that came from local business leaders like you and Oak Valley Community Bank was huge. So thank you, Chris. And so you just heard from three people that really, in no other way to put it, rose to the occasion and have, worked alongside Community Foundation and our partners to really respond to the community and its needs, and or as Tamara did, rethink how she was providing services to those in need, or Susie, how she was going to really keep her business afloat. And so all of that, I think, is what 2020 gave us, was creativity and agility, even in the face of overwhelming circumstances. So I will tell you, this idea of hindsight being 2020 is now just as compelling as the sort of branding we were going to go with last year, which was foresight is 2020. I think both are true, obviously. And I think it's not about hindsight or foresight, it's about vision. And the vision of Community Foundation has always been and remains that Stanislaus County is a community of choice where people, all of us, can choose to live, work, and thrive. And so the way we define that vision of us, our community being a community of choice, is that people have choices. People have choices of what kind of house to buy and where to send their kids to school and what they're going to do on the weekend. That it's a community that has a vibrant community with choices for more and more people. But it's also a community where no one's here by default. They choose to live here. They're here not because they got priced out of another housing market, but because this is their home. And so we are ever committed to that vision. And the way we achieve that vision, if you go to the next slide, is the work that we've really began to deepen and embed this year. And so this idea of vision also is that we can't unsee what we saw in 2020. We can't unsee who really are the essential workers in Stanislaus County. We can't unsee the racial disparities that came to the forefront of our collective consciousness. We can't unsee the poverty that was perhaps simmering below the surface, but was fully brought into view. We can't unsee who was truly impacted by COVID and in what zip codes and in what neighborhoods. So we saw a lot, and now it's on all of us to do something with that sightedness. And so our work in 2021, we've already begun it, is to expand our leadership in 4 key areas. Some of this existed pre-COVID, some of it is new this year in response to what we've seen. And these are sort of the 4 strategic pillars that we rest our leadership work around. Educational excellence is probably our oldest body of leadership work. We're really focused with the County Office of Education on critical pathways in a child's life from the moment they're born until the moment they enter a self-sustaining career by age 26. And that's the Cradle to Career Partnership. It's focused on critical gateways, starting with kinder readiness and moving all the way through to a living wage, self-sustaining job, as I said, as a young adult. And so we have multiple partners at the table really looking at those critical gateways. We don't think it's just on the part of schools to teach our children. We do believe that the entire community can rally around our children and young adults to make sure that they have a path, a plan, and a purpose. And so the Cradle to Career Partnership is a long-term systems change movement really focused on that. But what we also saw is that there wasn't a voice for parents and students as schools began to shut down and stay closed. And so we really are working on how do we build up more power, more opportunity for youth to advocate for themselves and for parents to really advocate for themselves within our school systems and within this community. So we are focused on that as part of the Cradle to Career Partnership. We also are really in that work centering race and equity and achieving more equitable outcomes for all of the 109,000 students that are in our K-12 systems. That's how many move through our systems at this moment in time and every year. And for the 32,000 kids that are age 0 to 5, that every kid, regardless of race or ethnicity or culture, has an opportunity to prosper in Stanislaus County. We also, as part of that, are focused on a dual enrollment project, a demonstration project, and we're releasing funding to have more K-12 districts develop college credit courses and pathways that begin in high school and transition kids very smoothly and seamlessly into college. So you'll be hearing more about several programs we'll be investing in the coming year. We also, as always, are really committed to scholarships. And I know we have several scholarship donors on this call. That is a really tangible way to invest in a child's life. Our second pillar of work that we really embarked on in the past year, given all that we saw, really preceded COVID with some research. And we always begin with data at the Community Foundation, as many of you know. And the work around economic opportunity really was galvanized by several data points that we felt were too difficult to look away from. And one of those data points was that 3/4 of the adults in Stanislaus County that live at the federal poverty line work full-time. And the second data point that was really hard, and yet we had to digest it, was of the 10 most recruited for jobs in Stanislaus County, only one pays a living wage that can sustain one adult and one child, and that's a registered nurse. So we know that we definitely need more quality jobs, and we need to have a more diverse economy and more mobility for more people that live on the margins of our economy, whether that's more small business opportunities, micro enterprises, certainly social enterprises, which is what we started to work on. But we are, and this is hard to say, but we are a disinvested community. We lack the infrastructure and the ladders that point people upwards, home ownership ladders, loan products, financial institutions that help the underserved, the underbanked, even things like accelerators and incubators for small business. So we really are focused on building up the infrastructure in this community to move more people out of poverty. And so some of the things we've begun to do, we've launched the Profit with Purpose Social Enterprise Accelerator. The first class was actually this week. There are 11 nonprofits participating in this program, and it's phenomenal. It's a 10-week online module fully funded by Evan and Norm Porges. And this program will give these 11 nonprofits tools and resources and the learning to develop business plans that really take both their nonprofit mission, but add a business component to it. And in doing so, many of them are actually training their own clients around workforce development. So it's partly workforce development, it partly diversifies the revenue stream for these nonprofits. And we've paired them with business mentors, local business leaders, so that by the time they move through this online module with the consultants we've hired, that they have a fully formed business plan that they're ready to launch that serves both a profit and a purpose for these nonprofits. So that's one of the things we're doing in economic opportunity. We also are investing in a community development corporation that City Ministry Network is forming. And that is really focused first in South and West Modesto, but will expand countywide. And what we began to understand is not a lot of nonprofits are really focused on financial mobility. We have some incredible nonprofits in our community. We didn't necessarily have one that begins and ends their core mission around financial literacy, financial mobility, access to lending, and those types of things. So a community development corporation does just that. And by forming a CDC locally, we're able to tap into federal and state funding that's specific to CDCs. And that's one way we can move from being a disinvested community to being a community that's ripe for investment and bringing more capital into this community from elsewhere to really improve the lives of those that live below the margins. We're also investing in 2 local credit unions to transition and become community development financial institutions. And those are great partners to CDCs because they also are able to draw down federal funding and other sources of funding and deploy those resources to underserved communities in Stanislaus County. And finally, we're really focused right now from a leadership standpoint at working with the county and our local business leaders, along with others, to develop a large-scale, long-term economic resilience initiative. And the question we're asking ourselves here is, if somebody came into Stanislaus County and wanted to drop $1 billion to transform our economy, what would we tell that person to invest their money in? And so we really have to be thinking outside the box as a community. And as we prepare for the next decade or more, we know the current administration is going to be deploying resources around infrastructure and innovation. And so this initiative, we hope, will really be a transformative economic development initiative focused on workforce development, economic development, and community development, neighborhood revitalization, and that these plans marry up and that there is a North Star that's focused on a future economy that builds on our current economy, which is wonderful, but really now begins to move us forward in a new way. So that's our work in economic opportunities. You could tell it's both granular, neighborhood specific, and long-term, larger transformative work all in one pillar. Our third pillar is really focused on what we began to see last year and maybe even before that, that we've lost our moorings a little bit as a society, as a civil society, that we have hunkered down in our social media rabbit holes and aren't necessarily taking the time to really have a civic discourse as a community and as a country. And at the Community Foundation, we very much believe that. We love divergence. We're okay with conflict. Those of you that know me know I'm very comfortable with conflict, but we also need to find common ground. And so we really are focused on civic literacy and civic engagement. And in that regard, another program we're debuting this year, we're about to announce 24 young adults in Stanislaus County, people of color, ages 18 to 26, that will serve 2-year terms on local nonprofit boards. We've had an incredible response from our nonprofits and an incredible response from young adults who are going to be placed on 2-year terms and also learning along the way about nonprofit governance. That program is called Next Gen on Board, and it's funded by Dave and Jeannie Olson. And we're just incredibly excited. It'll be the first cohort. We're also going to introduce a second cohort, and they're each 2-year terms. So by the end of this Next Gen on Board program, at the end of 3 years, we'll have 2 overlapping cohorts at about 40 to 50 young adults that are serving this community, serving our nonprofits. And we hope to see a lot of change as a result of that. We also, through our McClatchy Media Lab Fund, are investing in reporters at the Modesto Bee. And here's why we're doing that. I think we've gotten a lot of raised eyebrows about that investment. And we do believe that community journalism matters. We believe that data and facts matter. And so our investment in our local newspaper is we are shoring up an institution at a moment in time that's sorely needed in our democracy. And so those 4 reporters are focused on economic development, our underserved communities, our communities of color, focused on health, and focused on education. You're going to see those reporters and hopefully more journalism coming out of the Modesto Bee as a result of our investment. And we certainly saw that even during COVID. The reporter they had that was focused on children's health was a doctor, and she became incredibly instrumental to them during COVID. And she was funded in part by the Community Foundation. The third offering in this pillar is Civic Saturdays, and we hope you join us in the future. These are going to be happening every 2 or 3 months. Our actual next Civic Saturday is going to happen in July. They've been virtual so far, but we hope to start meeting in person. And Civic Saturdays it's a national program. And we have a fellow on our team here, Martha Flores, that's focused on this work, but it is a gathering of community members, and it is to restore our faith in our community and in our democracy. So it kind of follows a traditional, if you will, worship service, regardless of sort of what religion, but there's civic liturgy and civic songs and civic poetry. And again, it's about the restoration of our faith in our community. Our fourth pillar is really culture of philanthropy, and it's what all of you do every day with us. I will tell you, the scale of need has never been greater. The scale of your generosity has completely matched that need. And it's probably the thing that kept our team and our board going this past year, was every time we thought, okay, this is as hard as it's going to get, we got a call from one of you, from one of our donors, from one of our partners, really ready to step up to the plate. And that was just incredible to witness. It's what makes the work at the Community Foundation so joyful. So we really are focused on building a culture of philanthropy with all of you. And it's with not just with our donors, obviously, in our family of donors, but with our corporations and other individuals, whether they choose to give through the Community Foundation or not, and with our nonprofits. We want all of our boats to be rising. So this year, we're really focused on expanding our donor briefings and providing issues that may be of interest to you, and you will receive a poll. I think either both at the end of this webinar, but also via email, to tell us what you want to hear more about. What types of information do you all want to receive, those of you that are our donors? We're going to be hosting, starting this fall, nonprofit profiles. We're going to have GuideStar on our website, and those are nonprofit profiles. Nonprofits are filling out their information. Anybody can look at their 990s or their mission and their services. So we're undertaking that effort in the coming months. You'll see that on our website. We also are more and more providing concierge level grant making service. More donors are turning to us for some insight, some guidance, and that really accelerated in 2020. And we're going to continue to expand our knowledge base to support all of you. So that's our work and what it looks like. I will tell you, this whole idea of hindsight and foresight really brings me back to clear-sightedness and to vision, a vision that's larger than any one of us and really takes all of us to achieve. So If there are any questions, I'll pop here and look at the chat. If there's anything I don't see, thank you for the nice notes. If you have any questions for me or any of our panelists, I'll just keep chit-chatting for a minute. We also dropped the link. If you could just quickly click on that, and you're welcome to fill it out. Give us your thoughts on what you're interested in learning about in the coming year. And we're happy to really develop some donor briefings related to, I know homelessness has been an issue, and that's something the Community Foundation has worked on for several years now with our county partners and our city partners. But if there is anything else, please let me know. So I don't necessarily see any questions, so I'm going to give you the chance to get off the call a few minutes early. I just want to again extend my gratitude to all of you. Certainly to our team, our staff. You saw some of their pictures. I happen to have the good fortune to work with some of the most incredible and brightest people in our community here on our team. And we have the good fortune to work with an incredibly visionary board of directors who really believe, even with all that we've seen, that our better days are still ahead of us. But it is going to take all of us to make that happen. So I just extend my deepest gratitude to our donors, to our nonprofit partners that are on this call, to our board and staff, and just as always, thank you for everything you do, and have a good weekend. Thank you.